Beginning this June, I'll be gathering 5 or 6 folks who feel the call to live this next solar cycle as if it were their last. Rooted in the question of what truly matters when we live in full relationship with our impermanence, this journey invites a humble and wholehearted reckoning, a deepening into life through honest, integral intimacy, and a fierce, loving embrace of fear, grief, and praise. More than a program, it's an invitation to walk with death as an ally and live in alignment with what is most essential, held within the intimate companionship of a small committed group. This is a virtual group initiation into the living heart of impermanence. As the months unfold, we will tend to what remains unresolved, strengthen our connection to life, and complete the cycle with a ritual death and rebirth. Each month includes 2 group sessions, along with at least one one-on-one session with me for each participant. I trust this will be a threshold experience that is truly transformational, soulfully sobering, and life-clarifying. And I am so looking forward to walking it with those who feel drawn. I'll be sharing more in the coming weeks, but if your curiosity is already stirred, please feel free to reach out and we can set up an insight call to explore whether this container is right for you. I'm also hosting another virtual gathering on May 31st. The event is titled Rise and Revitalize, an online gathering to enliven and embrace the wild bloom of becoming. While I'm still confirming a few final details, 2 of the guest speakers are already on board, both of whom will also be featured in upcoming episodes of this project. I've created an early event page where you can learn more, and you'll find that, along with links to everything else I've mentioned, in the show notes. And lastly, I've launched a Substack publication called Hearthwoven. I haven't shared anything there yet, but the first essay will be arriving soon, I promise. Hearthwoven is to be a space for essays, poetry, podcast episodes, and bonus content, including extended conversations from this project as they emerge. It will be a slow burn at first, but I'd love to have you there as an early subscriber. For now, everything is freely offered, and eventually down the line, there will be a modest paywall for certain offerings in order to help sustain the creative energy that is behind all that I make. And now, let's orient toward today's conversation. Welcome to Wild Heart Revival, a gathering place for heartfelt conversations and stories as pathways of renewal and revival. I'm your host, Tay Tayari, and today's guest is Toko-pa Turner. Toko-pa opens a doorway into the imaginal world, reminding us that dreams aren't just fragments of the thinking mind, but meaningful expressions of nature herself. In this conversation, Toko-pa invites us to remember the ancestral art of dreaming, an embodied, reciprocal practice that has long guided the human spirit. We explore what it means to live a dream-led life in a culture that dismisses the mystical and the unseen. From the forgotten art of daydreaming to the courage it takes to step into the unknown, this episode moves through symbol, shadow, and silence, reminding us that dreams are not ours to possess, but a living realm to approach with wonder, humility, and love. Toko-pa Turner is a Canadian author and internationally celebrated dream worker. Her first book, Belonging, Remembering Ourselves Home, has been translated into 10 languages and won several awards, including the 2018 Gold Nautilus Award and the 2018 Gold Reader's Favorite Award. Her new book, The Dreaming Way, Courting the Wisdom of Dreams, has been shortlisted for the 2025 Book Life Prize and called remarkable by mythologist Michael Meade and exquisitely written by Jungian analyst Anne Baring. She lives with her husband in a small village in the heart of the Ottawa Valley. If you're new to the show, you might like to know that I'm a threshold counselor with an online practice dedicated to supporting wanderers, and edgewalkers. I offer individual, couples, and group counsel, as well as support around death and dying. To learn more, visit my website through the link in the show notes, and know that I also offer free insight calls, which provide a risk-free opportunity for us to connect, explore our alignment, and determine if we're a good fit to walk alongside each other during a pivotal time in your life. I'm generally open to connecting via email and video chat if you feel naturally drawn to do so, whether for guidance, curiosity, collaboration, or any other meaningful reason. So feel free to reach out at any time. And if you haven't yet, I invite you to subscribe to Wild Heart Revival on your preferred podcast platform. And know that your likes, comments, ratings, and shares are not only deeply appreciated, they are vital for supporting the organic growth of these heartfelt conversations and stories. Now, let's humbly open ourselves to the imaginal and the mythic as we welcome our incredible guest for today, Toko-pa Turner. So you say, without dreams, we could not survive. And although it is possible to get by without remembering our dreams, a life guided and shaped by dreaming is a life that follows the innate knowing of the earth itself. And it makes me have this kind of wondrous thoughtscape around how our so-called individual dreaming is deeply entwined, entangled with the dreaming of earth. And that by attending to our dreams with more consciousness and care, that we're actually connecting in with that greater earthly dreaming. And so I'm just curious to start off in this way of, hearing that quote said back to you and having this theme of our connection of individual dreaming to earth dreaming and how it connects us maybe to the animate world and the imaginal realms. I'd love to just kind of embark into that territory at the beginning here.
Yeah, for sure. Well, this is my favorite topic of conversation. So I'm happy to just riff with you on that. So I think one of the biggest misconceptions that we have about dreams as a result of being raised in a very rationalist-oriented culture is that dreams take place in the scaffolding of our craniums and that they are products of our brain. I don't believe this to be true at all, actually, in the same way that you can't say that breath originates in your lungs, or that the beating of the heart originates in the valves itself. Certainly I think the brain is involved in the dreaming process. We know that for a fact. But this idea that in order for the human being to exist, we have to produce, or it must be produced through us, this constant flow of meaningful images that are highly structured and detailed, if we're able to understand their language. It only makes sense to me that that comes from a greater source than our brains alone. And so we don't have that much difficulty understanding this in a physiological sense, that we as humans are part of a species, and that species is just one of millions of species that inhabit an ecosystem living together, kind of in a sense as one being, because we are all interdependent. right?
Mm,
Which you might call Gaia consciousness, the idea that we're all interconnected.
mm,
Well, why is it so hard for us to understand this idea on the psychic level as well? For me, it makes complete sense. And this is how I understand dreams. Dreams are nature, naturing through us.
mm,
And in the same way that a tree produces pine cones and seeds and flowers and all of these things, so too are dreams produced through us.
mm,
And as in the quote that you brought up, certainly we can live our lives, and many, many people do, not paying attention to their dreams and are still able to be really relatively functional. But in my experience, when you to listen to your dreams, when you try to understand their language, there is a profound sense of being guided by that something greater than ourselves alone, even greater than our own culture.
mhm, mhm. Yeah, something just clicked for me while you were sharing there. It's like today, it seems like we've outsourced our dreaming and our imaginal capacities, our creative capacities to technology. Because I've learned about more traditional cultures and how it seems like dreaming seems to be this central part of the cultures and community building, the sharing of dreams in the mornings, and the collaborative meaning making around dreams seems to be um, some kind of common thread through indigenous cultures. And like you're saying, so many people seem to get by without even paying attention these days. It seems like we've outsourced it, and that's actually like a really it's like taking essential nutrient out of our being and out of our creative capacity to attend to the mythic and the imaginal and the magical and the mystical. Um, yeah, what do you have to say about that?
Yeah, I mean, I do go into this a little bit in the book that I just wrote called The Dreaming Way, how we have outsourced our imagination to, various platforms. And what I mean by this is that the imaginal, if we think of it as an actual world that we are in communication with, that there is a reciprocal relationship that is meant to take place there,
Mm,
where we receive these images and if we tend to them, if we make a courtship of them, we can often find enormous wisdom and guidance that helps shape who we are in the world and how we move. And then our lives then become a kind of offering back
mm,
to that imaginal world. It's the way that we live our lives in accordance with that nature that's naturing through us is a kind of offering, right? And when we
mhm,
make that offering, the dreams respond and they encourage, they correct, they offer something new, they show us a new edge of growth. And so I think this reciprocal relationship with the dream world, as you pointed out, is par for the course in many of the older tribal cultures of the world. In fact, it's hard to find an indigenous culture that doesn't pay attention to their dreams as central to the practice of community and family. And yet, we, in what I guess you could call Western civilization, in the civilized, so called civilized world, have lost that sense of veneration and the reciprocity or reciprocal relationship with that other world. And the
mhm,
result is the dreams don't, they may dry up in the sense that people often say, oh, I don't dream. Which
mhm,
isn't true because we dream all the time.
mm,
It's just that the act of remembering is not being practiced.
mm,
And as a result, we don't remember. And as a result of not remembering, we are not fed.
Mm.
And what often happens is the things that we are meant to understand about ourselves will become desperate in a sense to get our attention. And the
Mm.
way that they do that is sometimes manifesting in physical ailments or even in crises in the external world. Certainly, as we are seeing collectively right now, is arguably a result of people not doing their shadow work, as it would be called in the Jungian world when it comes to dreams, not looking and acknowledging the unacknowledged aspects of the self that are taking dominion.
Yeah. Yeah, you touched on a couple of themes that I'd love to attend to later, which is this act of remembering as an active practice or as like an art, and as well as shadow work. But before moving in that direction, something else that just came up for me is it's it's like a, you hear people, I've heard say like, oh, that person's a dreamer. And there's almost this like negative connotation that can be portrayed around dreaming and imagination. Oh, they're lost in their dreams. And this sense of like, oh, I don't dream, or this denial really that seems to be in the culture to some significant degree. And I'm wondering if that's like some kind of trauma response, that by outsourcing our creative capacities, our imagination, our dreams to technology and the myth of progress, that we've have these like wounds or something that we then try to like cover up through denial or whatnot. And I love this idea of seeing your dreams as like living entities in a way. And you say a dream, like a good poem, reads you as well as you read it. And I interviewed this man, Simon Ugler, and we were talking about myth, and he said, when you take a step toward a story, the story takes a step toward you. And I think this is so important in like healing these psychic wounds that we might have around the imaginal and our dreaming capacity, is to remember and to play with the possibility of remembering that dreams are alive in a way, that they're part of the animate forces of Earth, and that we can create actual like living dynamic relationships with them. I'd love to talk about that a little bit more, whatever comes up for you.
Yeah, I think you talked about it as a kind of a wound or a um, uh, a denial, and I think in many ways that's true. I also think it's how we are raised in this culture that we are embedded in, which is to really dismiss anything that is invisible, anything that can't be proven and measured
Mhm.
with the instruments of materialism and rationality.
Mhm.
And, that's been going on for hundreds of years. And so it's very deeply embedded in our culture to give value and relevance to only that which we can see and measure, and to dismiss anything that falls under the purview of, the archetypal feminine, anything we would call the mystical or the feeling life or the intuition or the dreaming, this entire huge realm. Um, and even nature itself. And so we can see this division and split in human consciousness between these two ways of seeing. And so it is, of course, replicated at the level of the individual that we too devalue and dismiss because that's what we have been taught.
Mhm.
Um, and it's not true for everyone. Some people certainly have a very vivid and rich relationship with their dreaming life and with the animate worlds behind this one. and with stories and mythology. But I think we can all agree that it's countercultural. And so, what happens, I think, with this idea of outsourcing the imagination, I think it speaks to a kind of immaturity in our consciousness that would rather be spoon-fed ideas, would
Mm,
rather imbibe. I mean, literally, we call it the feed, would rather just imbibe the images and ideas that are provided to us,
mm,
um, instead of, you referenced your friend or colleague that talked about taking a step towards the
mm,
story rather than taking that brave step. And I call it brave because it requires an inordinate amount of courage to
mm,
step into the unknown, to even just allow for space for
mm,
that gap time without picking up our device or filling it in with some entertainment or even anxiety or obsession or whatever it is. And to take a step into what is unknowable, that sort of groundlessness. And this,
mm,
of course, is what artists and mystics and shamans have always done throughout time, is to step into that darkness, to step into that unknown. And the reason why it's so scary is when you take a step into it, there's no structure there. You don't understand the language, and all your fears come up. Am I making this up? This is stupid and irrelevant. I'm not going to find anything here. I don't have anything important to say. I
mm,
won't have the original ideas, and so on and so on and so forth, right? All of the thousand things that come up to block you from taking the next step. And many people just back out that and they're like, I'll just go back to the news feed, But I think this is what dreaming helps us with. It is a kind of invitation. It says, here is um, here is an expression in image form, in symbolic form of the invisible aspects of life.
mm,
And that can help you to give shape to the unknown.
mm,
And the trick then is learning how to speak the symbolic language, which is not easy. It's an art form and it takes some time to master. For some people, it comes quite naturally. But for other people, learning how to understand metaphor, how to understand symbols, requires a very different orientation
mm,
than the literal mind that we're used to employing in our calendar and clocks constructs.
mm. Yeah. I wonder if there's like an unconscious fear that many people have around going into the dreaming and the imaginal because of this this sense, this maybe unconscious sense of like, well, it's going to be soul revealing. It's going to share information that's going to confront a lot of what's going on in your life in the world, and it's going to call you forth into growth and change and evolution that's maybe going to be very difficult or scary or unknown, like you're saying. And you write about wisdom and Sophia in connection to um, dreaming and the unseen and the unconscious. And I can see, I feel like that's also connected to soul, that when we connect in with wild wisdom, we're also touching aspects of soul. And so I'd love to just hear what thoughts are here for you around that wisdom and soul revealing in connection to dreams.
Yeah, I think that's a very astute observation that many people are afraid that by paying attention to their dreams, that something will be required of them in return, and that we do love our comforts. We do love for things, in many ways. I think we love to be unconscious because it doesn't ask too much of us.
Mm.
However, the price that we have to pay is also great when we don't listen to the soul. And that price looks differently for lots of different people. But I think it can express itself in all sorts of ways. A feeling of life being flat, or a feeling of meaninglessness, of what is the point of this life anyway? A feeling maybe even of longing for maybe something you can't even name.
Mm.
That is the life you're meant to be stepping into, but which always feels out of reach, that you have something to offer.
Mm.
You don't know how to give it shape.
Mm.
And that brings a different kind of toll, doesn't it? Whether that's anxiety or depression or a sense of disconnection.
Mhm.
And I really think that we're living in an epidemic of that kind right now.
Mm.
I think people are, the first book that I wrote is called Belonging, and
Yeah.
it's all about this like profound epidemic of a feeling of exile that so many of us are feeling. And of course, that makes sense to me that we would feel that way, because that's the kind of culture we have created, through capitalism and rationalism and all of these things that are very one-sided, that have ignored this entire other side of life, where most of us are only living half a life as a result.
Mhm.
And so in the book, I introduce this very ancient idea, which was once called Sophia, which is the same as the word wisdom. Sophia and wisdom are the same. Sophia comes from the Greek, so the word philosophy has Sophia in it, philosophia. And it translates literally into love of wisdom. And so
Mm.
the Greek philosophers, their whole project was about the love of wisdom and trying to find the meaning embedded in the nature of life. But when we look into, and this is part of what I do in the book, The Dreaming Way, is explore some of these ancient scriptures and traditions, which was a real um, uh, pivot for me, because that's not normally the place where I would spend all my time. But I found myself fascinated to go into these ancient worlds of alchemy and
Mm.
Hermeticism and Gnosticism and the Torah and even Kabbalah, and finding this evidence of Sophia in the oldest of all of the traditions.
Mhm.
And so at one time, Sophia was actually a feminine divinity, not a god, but like an aspect of God,
Mhm.
what's called a hypostasis. And so over the centuries, as Christianity kind of took hold of the larger culture, as Western Christendom was on the rise, there was a stamping out of this feminine archetype, and
Mm.
instead it was replaced by this very practical definition of wisdom, which was this idea that a person becomes wise by having many experiences and accumulating a lot of knowledge. But that wasn't the origin of the word wisdom, and it wasn't the origin of Sophia. Sophia was this divine spark hidden in the literal physical nature of the universe and in ourselves. And the practice of the ancient mystics was to try and liberate that spark out
Mm.
of our own bodies and out of the physical world. And you would do this through things like dream work and contemplation and relationship with nature and ritual. And so I try to bring that back into a modern context. And so um, so just coming around to the idea that you brought about how when we pursue our dreams, it asks something of us which will change the comfort of the way we are living. I
Mm.
think this is true. In fact, one of the big images I think of Sophia and wisdom in our dreams is the image of the salmon swimming upstream against the water because it has such a strong sense of home, of where it has to go to
Mm.
fulfill its purpose. And so
Mm.
that's an amazing symbol for wisdom in each of us. And you're right, it will put you against the grain. And you're right, it is not easy. It is lonely. It is isolating. It is not for the faint of heart. And I just want to be upfront about that because inevitably, when you follow a path of purpose, it is going to set you against the mainstream. Why? Because the mainstream is going downstream, and they're saying nothing exists beyond what you can see with your eyeballs and this microscope, and you should just work really hard and pull yourself up by your bootstraps and forget about this purpose and dreaming nonsense. Get your head out of the clouds, and you can do that. And there's a huge momentum going in that direction. But
Mm.
I think there is a growing subculture of people who are disenfranchised with this very limited way of really understanding reality and the nature of existence. And they're saying, you know what? Life is short.
Yeah.
And I want to live this life knowing that I lived my life, not someone else's expectation of a life for me, whether that's my church or my family or my culture or my government, but instead living a life where I am bringing my unique contribution to the great family of things. And I can stand behind it and say, yes, it was lonely and it was isolating and it was fucking hard. Can I say
Mhm.
that on your show? Is that
Oh,
okay?
yeah,
Okay.
absolutely.
Phew, because I said it. But I want to die knowing I lived my life.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Yeah. Yeah, this sense of like following your dreams, following the dreams, following your purpose, your soul's path, your heart's path, that there's this necessity of courtship. And you talk about this in the book as well. And you mentioned it a bit earlier. There's a quote here where you say, just as in nature, every dream has a longing to thrive. Our job is to collaborate with our symbols to discover how to support and fulfill that longing. So, again, these symbols, these dreams are these living, like breathing, ensouled aspects of the whole. And in order to collaborate with them, as you say in that quote, to come into communion with them, we need to court them. And so I'd love to just hear more about that. I'm sure it's a huge topic, but I love this idea of courting your dreams and what that might look like.
Yes. Well, so I think a huge part of the mission that I came um, to this earth with was wanting to be part of a movement of people that are bringing dreaming back to the people, bringing them out of the ivory towers of academia, and
Mm.
remembering that we have the tools to understand this language and to support one another with collaborating with and realizing, actualizing the potential that is coming through our dreams. And so I think one of the first parts of that mission is decolonizing dreaming out of psychology. And
Mm.
I want to say this in respectful uh, um, in as respectful a way as possible, because I also recognize that a huge amount of the knowledge that I have gained about dreams has come from especially the influence of Carl Jung and the whole Jungian world, which is incredibly rich and soulful. And still, Jungian psychology is very much contextualized in the language and rationalistic approaches of psychology itself. And this is a very hard thing to decouple because, we started off this conversation talking about this idea of breaking down the myth that dreams are products of our minds. And this is a very tricky thing to do. I think it has taken me decades to get to the point where I feel somewhat successful with it. But I see others come up against that often. So we have this idea that we have to consult some kind of expert to tell us what our dreams mean, or consult some book of mythology or symbol system to tell us what our dreams mean. And I don't believe this is true at all. In the 25 some odd years that I've worked with dreams, what I've tried to do is look for the simplest tools that we can use to help the dream open up its wisdom to us. And the first thing I think we have to do is get away from this, what I call the acquisitional approach to dreams, where we have a dream and we think, well, what does it mean for me? What can I get out of this dream? Yeah, that's fine. But what is the takeaway that'll tell me what decision to make, or how to go forward? We treat our dreams a little bit like an ATM machine, that we expect some kind of insight, or we want to get something from it, right? But the reason why I love the word courtship, and I use it to describe my approach to dream work, is because in that very old-timey way, courtship, which is something we don't really employ anymore, but there was a time when we might know the object of our affection, and we would approach them respectfully from a distance and go through this kind of circling process as we hope to learn what it is that they love, what they like, what they find beautiful, what they want, and maybe even attempt to give it to them, so that they might invite us to come closer to them. And I realize that this is such a great description for how I love to work with dreams, that actually, instead of trying to get something from our dreams, we should be trying to learn what they want, what they long for, what they love. And this takes all the pressure off this idea that there is a right or wrong way to understand our dreams, and instead opens up a space of wonder, of presence, of curiosity, of resonance, a place where we can feel resonance with the dream, and we can create a kind of invitational field so that the dream chooses to naturally open up its wisdom to us. And so I've come up with what I think are 5 keys, or you could also call them postures or gestures with which to approach the dream, that will likely cause them to trust you and therefore offer their wisdom up.
Would you mind sharing a couple of them? I'm very curious.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I shared a few just now, but the 5 keys, they will sound deceptively simple, but they do take time to master. And so the first key, and I just want to emphasize that this is not a linear process. That's why I don't call them steps. And they can be used interchangeably in the course of working with a single dream. But the 5 keys, the first one is embodied presence. The second key is wonder. So that's kind of curiosity, the art of asking beautiful questions. The third key is reflection. So this is a kind of mirroring that we can do with the dream. And the fourth key is relating. So this is when we try to make bridges between what we've discovered in the dream and what is happening for us in waking life.
Mm.
So we're kind of making relational bridges between our worlds, but we might also be making bridges between the themes of our dreams and even between the images themselves within their own ecosystem. And then the final key is what I call synthesis. So that's where you take a step back and you look at all that has come out of the process and you bring it back together into cohesion. So it's
Mm.
really not about surgically analyzing. I try to even avoid the word interpretation. It's not about picking the dream apart. It's about showing up with presence, asking unique and sincere questions, um, engaging in a subtle inquiry with the dream, and then reflecting on what comes from that inquiry, and then looking from that reflection to how you could bridge what's come of that process back to something that's going on for you in waking life, or even internally for you. And then remembering to bring everything back into cohesion. And for me, synthesis, the final key, is also a big part of that, is doing ritual, taking
Mm.
action, doing something that acknowledges what you have been given by the dream, and using your life to put it into motion in some way, whether that is symbolic, ritualized, or even like a social experiment where you choose to do a different behavior as a result of what you've been taught.
Mhm. That's an incredible framework, even for like, I'm thinking, even just with like memories or traumas or visions, waking visions, psychedelic experiences, like that framework could be so supportive for any of that, I think. So
Absolutely. And one of the incredible things that I've learned about these keys is that they are actually um, the dream by nature of opening up and becoming reciprocal to us when we use these keys, is that it is actually teaching us skillfulness in all the areas you mentioned, but also in relationship with
yeah.
other people and with the natural world at large. So we are being shaped by the process of dreams.
Mhm.
Um, uh, re- I don't know how to word that, but we are being shaped in turn by engaging in this process.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And so it makes me think, looking at it in this deeply relational way makes me think about shadow work, which you mentioned earlier, because of course it's in relationship to others and beings, that we are constantly given the opportunity to attend to our shadows. And so I'm so curious to hear you jam on dream work and shadow work and how they're intertwined, and as well, if it feels right, how recurring dreams might tie into that. Um,
Mm.
I saw you wrote that recurring dreams are proof of our adaptiveness. They are evidence of readiness to heal psychic fractures. And so I'm really curious about how all those things tie together.
Yeah, okay, where to begin with that? Because those are both really big topics. I think one of the foundational pieces that is a good place to start with is with Carl Jung, because he discovered this thing, which was that when you understand what a dream is trying to tell you, what a dream longs for, um, the next dream that you receive builds upon the last understanding.
Mm, mhm,
And when you don't understand what a dream is telling you, that theme, if it's important, if it has roots, will come back again and again and again and again. And that's why you have recurring dreams is because there's something here that you need to learn for your growth that is your destiny,
Mhm.
in order for the dream to move forward. And so this may seem like a simple observation, but I just want to take a moment to recognize how profound wisdom that is. It means that there is something in us that knows which way we're supposed to go, right? It knows who we are meant to become. And I always think of, there's the classic image of the acorn and the oak, right? The acorn contains within its tiny little shell the entirety of what the oak is meant to become. And
Mhm.
so is it true for us that there is some kind of jam-packed wisdom that exists in our, I don't know, DNA, in our soul, in our pattern in nature, that is unfolding imagistically in our dreams. And so just hooking back to that piece we touched on earlier about how we're often afraid to turn towards our dreams because we're afraid that it will ask us to look at something that we don't want to look at.
Mhm.
Well, that is the definition of choosing unconsciousness, right? That's putting something into what the poet Robert Bly calls the long black bag we drag behind us, right?
Yeah.
That's his image for the
Yeah.
shadow, which I love so much. It's so evocative. But we
Mhm.
all have that long black bag. We're like, whoa, no, don't want to look at that. Ooh, that was too painful. Nope, not looking at that.
Mhm.
Ooh, that makes me really uncomfortable. I definitely don't want to look at that. Oh my God, that thing is soaked with grief. Stick it in the bag. And we all have something like that within us. The accumulation of those personal experiences that have somehow, fragmented off into this uh, mm, compartmentalized
Mhm.
part of our psyche, which we, call the shadow. But also in the shadow are lots of other things. They are the things we have not yet discovered about ourselves.
Mhm.
They are this huge storehouse of wisdom and creativity and ideas that are just, being left on the shelf, being left on red,
Mhm.
and so again, it takes great bravery to look into into the bag, to see what's there. And you really don't, like you said, like you pointed out, we don't have to go looking for it. We have endless opportunities. And what happens is they show up in the conflicts we have in our relationships. Shadow shows up in physical symptoms. Shadow shows up in feelings of anxiety and depression and all kinds of mental health dysfunction, um, despondency, disconnectedness, all of those. Those are ways in which shadow shows up for us personally. And then when you get a culture of people doing this all at the same time, then you get something called collective shadow, which is the accumulation of all of those unaddressed things that gain dominance
Mhm.
as a result of being repressed. And this is a little bit of a complex um, framework, but the image that I like to use to explain it to folks is if you think of a beach ball, and if you ever were a kid or even adult, and you had one of these beach balls and you tried to push it underwater and you tried to keep it underwater and maybe you were successful in sitting on it, but inevitably, boop, it pops out. And not only does it pop out, but it goes way, jumps up into the air, much larger than it started with, which was weightless. This is a perfect image for what shadow repression looks like. It's like, you can disavow it and deny it and ignore it for a certain amount of time, but eventually it's going to pop out, and it's going to look like losing your temper. It's going to look like, ooh, behaving meanly when you don't mean to, saying something that, oh, that is unlike me, that you regret. It looks like doing something rash because you were just going with a flood of feelings, or just not even paying attention to the signals your body was giving you and getting yourself into trouble. These are all ways in which the shadow pops out into our lives. And at its worst expression, I think we can actually develop physical illness as a result of not addressing shadow stuff. And it's not easy. And so the reason why I say that recurring dreams are signs of adaptiveness is because when you have a dream that is scary, that is that makes you wake up with your heart pounding, that has, threatening imagery in it, rather than push those dreams away, which of course is your instinct. You're like, ooh, I don't ever want to look at that dream again. I can't believe that was in my psyche. Instead, if you can treat it with a measure of curiosity and respect, and just be patient enough to write it down and possibly even begin to make a courtship of it, the wisdom that you will receive from that dream has the potential to transmute all of the energy it took to keep that thing under the surface into something that becomes your creative inheritance, something that fuels your originality, your voice, your passion, your beauty, your gifts. And so it is already a validation in and of itself that you're having a dream that frightens you, because it means that you are ready to heal that thing. If you weren't, it wouldn't come up. And just a small caveat here, which is when we're talking about people who have complex PTSD, who have dealt with extreme trauma and are having those kinds of images, which are repetitive images about the trauma that they experience, that is a different animal of dream. And those kinds of dreams are really best held in by a mental health professional, somebody who can help you hold those fragmented images and help you work through the grief and the fear and the trauma of those moments. So I just want to put as an aside like that, because not every dream can be held alone, and it's important for us to have support systems. And it's very unfortunate that that isn't embedded in the culture that we live in. Wouldn't it be wonderful if we all had a dream person that we could, turn to in our village and say, I had a really scary dream that I need help with. So part of the mission that I have been following is trying to create these satellite communities of dream groups wherever I go, so that they can use these simple tools to begin to create infrastructure in their own communities and lives in order to become those people for each other.
Yeah, that's so beautiful and important. I'd love to take the last moments we have together to talk about like rituals and enactments. And something that struck me from what you were just sharing there, like that beach ball metaphor is so potent, because it's also highlighting how it actually, and you even said it too at some point, like it takes energy to repress. It takes energy to hold down. It takes energy to turn away from your unconscious, your psyche, your soul, these deeper parts of yourself. And so that it's not like it's just being left. You're actually you're being used up in the process of turning away from. And so this reclamation process of turning toward, it's not that it is necessarily going to take more energy. It's just like redirecting, you know? And so I think that something that you write about, like these different rituals and enactments, are this conscious redirection of your energy to reclaim the magic and the mystery and the incredible creative capacity that lies within our dreaming and our imagination. And so, you know, you talk about active imagination, dream incubation, but I'd love to just hear whatever is present for you now that feels important to maybe share with the listeners, of ways to actively turn toward and cultivate practices that will help fortify this relationship with our dreaming.
Yeah, absolutely. It's such an essential part of dream work. And I think one of the things that people most often forget or neglect to do, which is to give thanks.
Mm.
And giving thanks to the dreams is, I mean, it's essential. I think of dreams a little bit like lovers, you know, like if you shower them with attention and admiration and gifts, they're going to open their hearts to you and give you their greatest love and wisdom. But if you turn away from them, if you neglect them, if you take and take and take and give nothing back, well, the result is they will begin to wither and they won't give those yields to you. They may even disappear for periods of time altogether. But there's and even there's another technology that happens in ritual acts, which is that when you do even the smallest little ritual to acknowledge and give thanks to what the dream has taught you, or what, if you are searching for this idea of what the dream loves and what they long for, to make a ritual in honor of that piece, of that thing the dream longs for, which is really your life, you know, your soul, what your soul longs for. Is that it has the effect of solidifying that thing. The act of giving it physical form, physical validation and veneration creates a kind of leverage which helps to make it more real.
Mm.
And so just to give you an example of what I mean by ritual, because I think sometimes people hear that word ritual and they, you know, some people have trauma around ritual and they're like, oh, get that away from me. I don't want to get involved in that woo-woo stuff or whatever it is. But I mean something very simple with dream work. Let's say you have a dream about a beautiful woman dressed in this particular Grecian blue dress. And when you do a courtship of this dream, you realize that her strength and her power and her wisdom are really symbolic of your soul itself, that there's something about that color that conveys that bright clarity that rings like a bell and clears all the unnecessary debris from your psyche. And so you have this dream, you do this courtship, you receive this wisdom. Now, what are you going to do about it? Well, something as simple as maybe finding a scarf that is that particular blue that evokes that same feeling for you, and wearing that scarf into public, or just having it on your body. That's a ritual. That is just a ritual act that says, I'm going to take something of the image of the dream and bring it into this world. And every time you see that scarf, or every time you see that object that's on your altar, or every time you try a different behavior in situations where you're attempting to change, this is an act of celebration and recognition of the dream in waking life. And it helps to solidify that bridge between your worlds. So you think of them less as separate things, as
Mm.
divided things, and they start eventually becoming one thing. Soon, the world begins to take on dreamlike proportions, and synchronicities start to happen for you. And you meet just who you were meant to meet, and you have those moments like breadcrumbs on a path of feeling like you're heading in the right direction, or something from your last night's dream pops into your path. And
Mm.
similarly, in your dreaming life, you start to feel a growing lucidity, a sense of volition, of self awareness that allows you to make more conscious choices in your dreams. And so you see the worlds start to blend in this way. And you no longer start to think of them as two worlds, but more like two dimensions of the same world, a layered world, a layered reality, which feeds you both when you're asleep and when you're awake. So I think this is one of the big powers of ritual, and the chapter in my book on this, I call it rituals and enactments, because rituals are just one thing that you can do, but you mentioned a couple of other things like active imagination and dream incubation and lucid dreaming, and also social experiments like choosing to go on integrative walks and dream walks and things like that. These are all things that you can play with as a way of strengthening the bridge between your worlds.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And what about, like, daydreaming? Uh, I'm sure it's kind of complex to what daydreaming is for any given person, but when you mentioned how it becomes less about being two separate worlds and more of this kind of integrated flow of two dimensions of the same world, it makes me wonder about the importance of daydreaming, and is that just like a type of uh, what is that? What did I say? Active imagination? Is daydreaming active imagination? And what's the kind of importance to place into daydreaming? I'm just curious to hear about
Yeah,
that.
for sure. Let's talk about it. First of all, I want to say bring back daydreaming. I would actually like a t-shirt that says that, because I think it's so incredibly valuable. And, scientists have done all of these amazing studies which have discovered that if you just give a person in a day of time to daydream, they will perform their functions and duties far better than they have much better creative uh, um, solutions and ideas as a result of versus somebody who does not have time to daydream or who doesn't take time to daydream. So I mean that alone, we have scientific evidence, um, so there's that. But I do differentiate between active imagination and daydreaming, because for me the difference is daydreaming is just allowing your mind to wander, right? You're
Mhm.
not engaged in any sort of conscious intent. Um, and active imagination actually is more like a meditation. You are really trying to focus your intent because you're wanting to, say, have a active imagination is a process of having a conversation with the unconscious, with a particular symbol or with a particular character in your dream, or even with a project or whatever it may be for you. And so the active part
Right.
is essential in the definition, whereas daydreaming, I think we sort of define it as just letting your mind wander. And
Mm.
also that's different from night dreaming, because with night dreaming you have no conscious or little conscious volition unless you're lucid dreaming. So but daydreaming, you are conscious at the time that you're doing it, so the conscious
Mm.
mind is involved. But I think, wherever you can daydream instead of scrolling on your phone, you should 100% do that. It's going to be so. I have my best ideas in the shower. I don't know about you, but
Mm.
in those gap moments where I am just my mind is wandering,
Mm.
that's when it wanders into the most exquisite territories.
Yeah, certainly when I've had the opportunity to go deep into a daydreaming experience, I'm often blown away at the inspiration and the creative ideas that come flowing through. And I totally agree. If we can choose to engage in that more often than we do to these outsourced dreaming moments with social media and things, like we're just going to stimulate so much more of our authentic, inspired expression and creativity. So yeah, thank you for sharing it in that way. We're at the end here. So just thank you so much for making this happen. This was so beautiful and rich, and I feel just even more motivated to turn toward my dreaming and my creativity, and um, really just to feel more wonder and awe at the fact that we even have that opportunity. So thank you so much for inciting that and supporting that.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, Tay, and for holding such an exquisite and embodied presence, which allowed all of this conversation to come forth, and for the beauty of your questions as well. I really appreciate all you brought to our conversation.
Oh, thank you for that reflection. Is there anything coming up in your offering world that you want to point people toward? Of course, your books, absolutely. But if there's anything else that to
Yeah, the best thing to do is really just to go to my website, which is tokopa.com, and Tokopa is spelled TOKO-PA.com, and to sign up for my mailing list, because that's
Mm.
where I announce whatever is happening. Next month, I'll be offering a talk on metaphor, and doing a deep dive on metaphor, which I really view as the world's joinery system. That images are there to, those symbolic images are there to join our worlds and provide
Mhm.
a kind of relational bridge between them. And so I'll be doing a deep dive on that for the Comox Valley Young Institute.
Oh,
And so I'll be announcing that on the newsletter. But other than that, there's always little things going on here and there. So if you sign up, you'll get the what's happening.
cool. And what's the date of that talk?
It is April the 25th.
April 25th. Okay, so this month.
Yes, April
Great.
25th, 2025.
Okay, okay. And will that be streamed online? Is
It's a Zoom event.
okay,
Yeah, it's a Zoom event. So I think there's a recording provided afterwards if you can't make the live talk.
great.
Yeah,
So I'll try and get this out before then. So hopefully some people are inspired to join that.
that'd be
That'd be
great.
awesome. Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Cool. All right, Togo-pa. Thank you so
Thank
much.
thank you so much. Have a wonderful day.